Closing remarks. So in the next 25 minutes, we're going to welcome 3 other people to the stage with Sami and I, and then we're going to take us home. So can I please welcome Tom Saunders, Head of Public Engagement at UKRI, Lewis Hu, Founder and Director of the Science Ceilidh, and Haidee Bell, Head of Community Engagement at Wellcome. Please join us. Welcome, welcome. Now, you've heard a lot from Sami and I today, but Sami's been a brilliant co-host, but this kind of work is not at all new to you. This is meat and drink to everything you do. So before we sort of hand over to our guests to give us their final remarks and reflections, I would love to get a sense of what are you taking away from today? What's your vision? How does this thread through your work?
More than happy to. I think before I go deep into the big questions, I think it would be worth introducing who I am as a human and where I come from and what got me into this space. So I came to the UK at the age of 10 as an asylum seeker and got refugee status a few months ago, which was over 11 years after we actually initially claimed it, which was quite some time. But that did mean that after sixth form, during COVID, I did not get the support to actually go into full-time employment or higher education because I was not unable to do so. So that meant I was in this limbo trapped between my bedroom and my kitchen where I was not doing anything at all, just basically trying to live by for about a year and a half. And then I ended up being quite suicidal and ended up in A&E for a day because I did not want to be here. And that's my lived experience and how I started, because then through that I was signposted to a therapist who looked at the bigger picture of how to support me, because she knew what was written in the books, but she knew those support systems would not work for me because I did not have access to them. So she signposted me to the Running Charity, which is a charity that supports young people who struggle by getting physically active within their communities, and the cathedral. So there was me going to the cathedral once a week every Sunday, saying the exact same things in repeat, trying to speak broken Portuguese to Portuguese tourists just so they get a sense of belonging when they're into that space. But that slowly skyrocketed, and I realized that to be able to make a difference, I think my voice was important, and it had to be heard in spaces like these where it's not normally heard. So now currently I have 9 non-exec positions in schools and charities, 2 of which I chair. I also sit on a national fund, which has given out £140 million of funding over the last decade to organisations and individuals. And I also support 18 universities with co-production and clinical mental health research around how to do this sort of stuff and how do you make sure you create the conditions to enable young people, old people, anyone who has lived experience and is maybe vulnerable to come into this space and be their full self, but also support us to do our work better. So I think participation starts with meeting people's needs and looking at what is missing from their lives and what are the bits that are preventing them from participating in this work. It's already been mentioned several times today. Is there warm food you're providing? Are you reimbursing travel expenses? Is there anything out of pocket that the young person or anyone has to pay that may become a barrier eventually? And how do you support them and recompensate them to do this work properly, where when they're in that space, they're not thinking about, oh, what am I going to feed my children when I get back home, or I can't pay for the bus fare back to my house. That's, I think, one of the most important things for me. It's definitely more challenging in the current context of society, where there's so much happening. Things get so complicated. We are constantly firefighting, and I know quite a lot of us are working in the not-for-profit sector here. It often feels like we're just trying to do a problem that was caused yesterday without thinking about what we want to do in the long run, which I think we need to reshift from. We need to think about strategy and innovation and how can we be more creative to solve the problems that we have, and how do we do them alongside the people that we are trying to deliver these solutions for. And that takes effort, I think, and more often than not, we don't have the capacity to do that. So how can we intentionally create the space to think about those things? I I think the systems we are in are inherently built to be not inclusive. And that is something that we don't often talk about because we like to sugarcoat things with euphemism, thinking that everything's going right. A lot of things are going right. There's a lot of progress being made. I do want to say that, but there's so much more that we could be doing. And things don't stop here. I think I want to highlight for me specifically today, the most important thing was I thought I would be the only person screaming at the top of my lungs around lived experience and involving us. But I wasn't the only one. I actually took a step back and I was like, there's other people, especially the accountability group, that were talking about their lived experiences so vulnerably and openly. And I think that's the important piece. That's the missing part of the puzzle, that we need to work with people within the communities that we are trying to support to create something that is beautiful and that works, and that is sustainable in the long run, not just for now. So, bigger picture, I see a world where science isn't just for academics and researchers, it's something for everyone that stems from our shared curiosity about how to make the world a better place. And there is a lot that needs to be done, but I am hopeful that we can do it together. And on that note, I will turn to Lewis, who is Director of Science Ceilidh, to see what he wants to add on Helen's initial question and anything else as well.
So my reflections for the day. Thanks, Sami. And I kind of want to springboard off that a wee bit. So I think for me, a couple highlights, probably 4 very quick ones. I think the first one was from Pandora earlier this morning. And I think for me, that context, and even there's a bit talking about the community-led research and how it developed food, and then raising how for some of us we can't go home, and this work doesn't happen in a bubble, and there is a political context in this work where this is not just, we talk about better research, of course that is important, but this is not a theoretical nice to have. This is actually one of the ways that we can think about our democracy, and that is we're at a challenging time in our democracy. And so whilst not being overly grandiose, but community-driven research is an important tool. And we've heard examples of that, and Sami, you've just shared some personal examples of why that is so important. So I think that emotional context is something that we don't talk about enough. But yeah, particularly to Pandora, and my country is very limited these days, but Dode, thank you very much. My second reflection, I guess, builds on that, is recognizing the precarity of the sectors. And I think something that we can do sometimes inadvertently is make a bit of a them and us, right? And so there's a bit around communities have to lead this research. And of course, there's a political point about this. There's historic precedent about, as you say, the systems of research being extractive or colonial. But at the same time, we're all being challenged in different ways. The university sector is also incredibly precarious at the moment. And so there's something about recognizing that it isn't a them and us. And within our Community Knowledge Masters network, it's really important that it's always a spectrum. Researchers are members of their communities and they have lived experience, and communities can be researchers. We know that. And so it's not a them and us mentality. And I think that's particularly important. And that comes up to my third reflection, I think, which again comes to the morning panel, and just hearing from Hannah, and I really loved when Hannah was talking about the infrastructure of solidarity. And I think that's something that I'm going to take away with me for sure, in terms of sometimes we talk about infrastructure in our projects, and we talk about values being a part of our infrastructure, having the time and space to do good by your values. But I think having an infrastructure to recognize that solidarity is a key part of that feels incredibly key. And then the final point, I'm a bit biased because this afternoon I had to do the workshops about relationships. But I suppose the takeaway that I think really resonated for me, and I think maybe picks up on maybe that slight, it wasn't cynicism, but it was like, it was a mixed element about how do we feel about community research and how it is at the sector. And I think it is very exciting time. There's a lot of interesting work happening. I think the one thing I'm cautious about is that we can't change these systems through projects alone. Right? And there's something I said in each of the workshops, nice projects are great, but when, oh, we've got this lovely project and therefore we don't need to worry about changing these research processes or how we do procurement or how we can pay communities. So, and that's when projects can be, to be frank, weaponized to actually keep us away from system change. So I don't think anyone in this room is thinking that, but I think it's just sometimes important to think about solidarity, to be recognizing that. So we're all together in this room. This is an incredible moment for us to think about, well, how do we work together to not keep the eye on the prize, I think.
I think that's brilliant, and it really connects with, there's a lot of that's being done, but who's playing that connecting role and acting as the infrastructure piece to actually enable this sort of work to happen in the bigger pictures and bigger scale of things. And that brings me to you, Haidee. Haidee is the head of community engagement at Wellcome, and you do quite a lot of work within these spaces.
Sure, yes. Is this working? So yes, I'm Haidee and co-lead the community engagement function at Wellcome Trust, which funds health research into a number of kind of urgent health challenges, infectious disease, mental health, climate and health, as well as work on a broader portfolio of curiosity-driven research. And we have an explicit agenda at the moment in Wellcome on closing the gap between those who benefit from research. And our work as a community engagement team has really focused over the last years on thinking about practice like this. And so we have a project called Centres for Exchange, which is very much like the Community Knowledge Fund, but working. I'm hoping I might bring a bit of a kind of global South perspective just into this work, as about 80% of our work as a team is in the South. I guess with additional challenges of colonial legacies of research and so on to kind of to think about as well. And I think some of the things I've been reflecting on is, isn't it brilliant to be at this conference? I can't quite imagine having had the momentum, the kind of call and the sort of networks to be able to run a conference like this even 3 years ago, never mind 5 to 7 years ago. So it just feels really momentous that this is even happening, and how awesome to be able to come together and be able to share practice in this way. And I think I share some of Bella's optimism from the start of the day that these things wouldn't have been happening, certainly when I started at Wellcome 7 years ago. And I'm hoping that this is a slow pace of change, but that we are on a journey with that. But I suppose the thing that I observe, and I suppose I see this work in a bit of an ecosystem level. I'm very far from the kind of work that's happening on the ground, as is my team. So what I see is the kind of ecosystem shifts, and this is a field that's still very much defined almost by practice, by distance, that research is designed almost to be kind of neutral away from the kind of the day-to-day of it. And so we need to continue to think about how we bridge this distance, and the work that's happening in the work today that we've heard about are brilliant to think about how do we grow this practice. But the disconnections between those who hold embedded knowledge and those who hold power is still mostly the practice. This is still super common. So how do we continue to kind of build this momentum in this field and deliberately facilitate more of these kind of exchanges? But also, I think, name this, that this is a problem that we think about distance and neutrality in research. This isn't really where we need to be taking the conversation. And one of the drivers of distance I was also thinking about through the day is the way that we celebrate knowledge in the system, the way that scientific conferences, the way that we think about papers that are written, the way we think about policy briefings. These very little changed in 400 years. It's amazing with all the sorts of digital technologies we've now got for much more decentralized and democratized sharing of knowledge, how much still that is the system that we're working against in the way that research and knowledge is shared. So I think we should really think about some of the calls that I think Deborah was making for feedback loops, and actually how are we reinventing also the ways that what we're learning through this practice is embedding itself in that more traditional systems of knowledge as well, and responding to the multiple opportunities for change that we're seeing. I think there's a question on pace and how we hold our nerve. There was a lot of a sense, I think, today that this is going all too slow. It's great to see this change, but is it fast enough? And I think, tempting as it is to think about the ways that we might proffer solutions and think about methodologies of participation, these can be seen, if we're not careful, as sort of performative inclusion. And I think we've heard a little bit about that from Lewis just now, but actually how we're actively addressing some of the more organic needs for long-term funding and shifts towards local and dynamic change. And the Ideas Fund was awesome, I think, as an example of that, where we've really seen change over a number of years. And finally, I think I was just going to mention, I think we've been circling around this concept of dignity quite a lot today. I'm not sure we've used that term, but it feels that we are needing to celebrate the dignity of many, many people as knowers in this system. We've heard lots today about how people all together are sharing accountability for bringing together knowledge from different perspectives and different people. And yet we see that it's all too often the opposite that's happening, that we have a deficit of credibility, that people aren't involved in the kind of interpretation of their lived experience. And so as a funder, I suppose, just to kind of name that really right at the end, I think we need to be thinking about how this is legible. I liked Hannah's word about legibility at the start of the day, in making sure that those who are making funding decisions and investing in a lot of this work really understand the complexity of this. So that's one of the things that I'll take back to Wellcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I want to introduce Tom Saunders, Head of Community Engagement at Wellcome, to give your final remarks. You've supported and invested.
Just quickly, he's not from Wellcome.
Did I just say Wellcome?
Yes. Sounds Ceilidh.
You get it right.
I'm so sorry, Tom. It's been a long day. It's time to go. I'm so sorry. From UKRI. And although, Tom, you can give us your remarks both from a sort of personal perspective and a sort of strategic UKRI perspective, just hooking back to perhaps some of Steve's thoughts this morning, but just to say that UKRI have been an incredible, particularly Tom has been, and the team have been an incredible ally and advocate for this work. And shifting a tanker, even 1 degree or half a degree, is a job that can last years and years and years. So just to acknowledge, to your point, actually there is the us and them. It's like it's an important thing to sort of transcend at times, just to acknowledge the difficulties of other people, even if they sit on huge amounts of funding. Actually, people in those organisations trying to shift things, it's not easy. And so I think a good amount of props to you, Tom, for contributing to that. And so over to you.
Well, thanks for those warm words, Helen. Yeah, so I guess, today I think has really been a sort of celebration of community-led research and innovation. And thanks to all of you really for coming along and sharing your really inspiring work and stories. I think, Helen and I have had lots of discussions about this work and what we're trying to do with it. And I guess that question of why focus on research and innovation? Often it's not the thing that's closest to communities and what they talk about and what they say they need. But, I guess the thing is we're entering a world where research and innovation are everywhere, data is everywhere, and the change that's coming from that is rapid. And so for us, I think this is really about empowering communities, giving them the tools they need to shape their futures. And I guess why do we need to do that? And, a lot of people have said it today, but this way of working isn't normal in the research and innovation system. So researchers get funding, to do cutting edge research. I think there's almost a model of kind of like trickle down innovation, right? So that you get this kind of cutting edge research, which will eventually benefit all of us. But I think, now there's increasing evidence from surveys and the work of case that there's quite a large proportion of people in the UK that don't feel any connection to research and innovation and don't feel that it has benefits to their lives. So that's what we've been doing really, with the Community Knowledge Fund, with Community Research Networks, is looking at how we change this. And I think, we've heard lots of really good examples today. The centric work from the Community Knowledge Fund, the work we've done in the, funded in the Highlands and Islands, collecting data about climate change and building that into the work, climate adaptation plans. I think a lot of the work here is about better data, making it more relevant, improving people's lives. But, this really goes far beyond data, and the Community Knowledge Fund, it was really about giving people the power to design and deliver research. So what a lot of people have been talking about today, and what we saw from that really was that people built skills, they built confidence, and they were empowered. And that can be quite different to a sort of standard research project where communities are engaged. I guess thinking about the future and just reflecting on this idea that what's the trajectory for community-led research and innovation? I think, I think the sort of scale of intervention needs to match the ambition. And so a lot of interventions in the past, a lot of this work is based around very small project funding. And so what we did, and we're working with the Young Foundation on this, is to design the Community Research Networks program to really look at what would it take to transform the relationship between research and society. And people have also mentioned it today, but we work with communities to design the parameters of this fund. So communities asked for long-term funding. So this is a 6-year program. They asked for funding which is not just about projects. So this is funding to build networks, skills, and capacity. And crucially, they asked for funding to lead the research themselves. And so these communities are getting roughly $1 million each to lead the research. Sometimes they're bringing in universities, but not always. We're really hoping that this intervention, I guess, could kind of lead to that step change in that relationship between research and society. And I guess, we're hoping other funders look at it and think about what they can do with that. And for us, it's really about what can communities do when they're given the tools they need to succeed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tom. I'm going to hand over to Sami in a second just to close us out. Thank you all. I just want to leave with one big reflection that I've had today, which is essentially that I sometimes think that we forget, not to diminish anything that anyone said today or in this room or in sessions, I think sometimes we just forget about the innovation bit of research and innovation, or we assume that innovation is about how to do things differently through research. But actually, I was just thinking about John's story from the accountability group earlier today, when he was saying he had the privilege of being able to not only understand the knowledge to understand the microplastics in his bedroom and beyond, but he had the wherewithal then to think about, right, I'm going to change my duvet, and let's not mention the dressing gown, but you know what I mean. And so just to land that point, that just because knowledge is created by communities and mobilised by communities, it doesn't mean to say that they feel the effects of it. And so in that way, it is a kind of political act to be thinking about research and innovation. So how does that then make that change, and what needs to change around that? And that takes you into a completely non-academic, completely non-community, completely kind of any of this environment, into spaces of politics, democracy, social change, social justice out there in the world. So I think I would just be really thinking about, if we're building the infrastructure for research and community-driven research, what does the infrastructure for innovation look like, and what kinds of things would you need to wrap around that to make that a reality? We're getting there, but I do think that's the overwhelming feeling I have. Sami?
And don't be afraid to challenge people. I think we get afraid of doing that. Just to say a huge thank you to all of you for being here and coming to a space like this and actually making it your own. I think this did not feel like a general academic conference where everyone's talking about academia and at least I get bored. I don't know about everyone else, but this didn't feel like that. We are more than happy for you to pick up the conversations from today in the foyer for the next half an hour to 5:15, though then we all have to leave because the British Library wants us out. You can leave the Young Foundation and UKRI team's feedback through our online feedback survey. There should be a code on the screen in a second. And we'll be in touch via email to share what has emerged from the day with the key outputs around learning and lessons. Also, last but not least, thank you for our partners and funders, UKRI, for helping us co-host this space. And especially to the Young Foundation team for running around behind the scenes and making it all happen. And with that, can we have an applause for everyone in this space? Thank you.